My name is Michael Kluckner. I'm the author and artist of The Rooming House, and you're listening to True North Country Comics podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this episode, I chat with Michael Kluckner about making The Rooming House. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. It's also available on the True North Country Comics channel on YouTube. I invite you to like and subscribe. Michael is a writer and artist-illustrator residing in Vancouver, British Columbia. His early books on the history of Canadian cities, heritage, planning issues, and art include Vancouver the Way It Was, Vanishing Vancouver, Paving Paradise, and British Columbia in Watercolor. They received some acclaim, including the Duthie Prize, the Vancouver Book Prize, the Toronto Book Prize Shortlist, the Hallmark Society Victoria Award of Merit, and the Heritage Canada Medal of Achievement. Michael also published Tashika, his first graphic novel, in 2015. That book was followed by 2050, a post-apocalyptic murder mystery, in 2016. An unconventional graphic biography, Julia, traces the life and times of writer-explorer Julia Henshaw and was published in 2018. His most recent effort is entitled The Rooming House. Michael's new book, The Rooming House, from Midtown Press, is set in the 1960s and early 70s, where thousands of youths were on the road, hitchhiking across Canada and the USA and traveling through Europe, living in rooming houses in cities like Vancouver and in communes in the country. Their individual stories played out on a canvas stretched across the frame of the world events, including Vietnam, Woodstock, Watergate, and the emerging environmental movement, often in a climate of idealism, protest, and anger. This book follows several of these young men and women sharing an old home in Vancouver's Kitsilano district, tracking their loves, losses, and wanderings through the diary entries of two of them. It is both a coming-of-age novel and an exploration of the events of those years, complete with a downloadable soundtrack of rock classics and notes for readers who weren't around then. And so, without further ado, here's my chat with Michael Kluckner about making The Rooming House. So, Michael Kluckner, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Yeah, thank you, John.
I appreciate your time. What I usually do to start off the interview is ask the creator about their first comic book. So, I'm wondering if you remember, what was the first comic book that you read?
I'd like to say that it was Archie Comics. I'm not sure that would be true. It might be a Sergeant Bilko or something like that when I was a little kid. Archie and Veronica and that whole gang really sticks in my mind. Early on, I think probably because of an older brother, I got very involved with reading Mad Magazine. And I think Mad Magazine is probably the biggest influence on my life. Like, forget about university, forget about school or proper upbringing or church or anything like that. I think it was all Mad Magazine.
Yeah, good stuff. That's for sure. That's for sure. So with that in mind, I'm wondering who or what inspires you to create today?
If you do this, it's an itch that you have to scratch. It's not like I'm inspired because I think I'm going to become famous or I'm going to become rich. You wake up in the morning and you think, I'm going to draw this, or I've got a plot idea in my mind or something like that. So it's entirely a sort of an internal thing that would happen. I'm extremely grateful that I can be published and that people will read the things that I do. But I think I would probably do them anyway if that didn't exist.
Okay. Are there any artists or writers that you admire that make you want to create even more?
Well, going back to Mad Magazine, I wish I was Mort Drucker, who just died, I think, a year or so ago in his 90s.
Yes.
I wish I could draw as well as he could.
Yeah.
In terms of more formal art, I think probably my favorite artist of all time is Hokusai, Katsushika Hokusai, the Japanese guy who manga is really, the word that in a sense was invented for the kind of drawings that he did. Mm-hmm. And if I were to come over into Western culture, I would probably say Goya. early 19th century Spanish artist with
Right.
an incredible range, everything from the most formal oil paintings that you will ever see to drawings of the horrors of war, that type of thing.
Right, right. Well, we're here talking about your latest book called The Rooming House. So I wonder if you could talk a wee bit about the story and maybe what inspired you to create it.
What, in a way, inspired me to create it was realizing, this is about 10 years ago or 12 years ago, realizing that you never really go out of touch with people nowadays because of the internet, because of email, Facebook, whatever it is. However, when I was in my 20s, that was what happened, that people were on the road, people were moving on. And so somebody would leave and you would never see them again, or you might run into them entirely by chance. And so that was part of the thing. The other part is thinking back 50 years ago. I'm in my early 20s, and we're all living in rooming houses. We're all having affairs with each other. We're all doing this sort of thing. And so it's a little bit of nostalgia on my part, but it's also, I think, comparing what it's like now with what it was like then. And so, everything about being poor, about trying to be creative, about trying to make enough money that you could buy enough time that you could do the things that you wanted to do. And then all of the characters whose paths you would cross in doing that. And so the logical place to set this in was in one of the rooming houses that were very typical of, well, Vancouver, just about anywhere at that time, where, maybe they were lived in communally, or maybe they were split up into little housekeeping rooms or flats or that type of thing. And so that's basically what happens. And when I was thinking about how to do this, I thought, well, I could do it as a conventional graphic novel with the dialogue balloons and so on. But I was more interested in doing a kind of an artwork that was more a single panel. And it occurred to me that what I could do was I could tell it through the diary entries of two people. And anybody who reads this is not going to be surprised that there's a happy ending, that the guy and the girl get together at the end.
Right.
So, but it's along the way, all the twists and turns and everything that happens to them that they tell through their diary entries that makes the kind of the narrative of the book, I guess you would say.
Right. Very interesting way you've positioned that. And as the pages evolve, you're engrossed in the story.
If I can say further to that, a lot of people, I think, who read books and buy books are resistant to the traditional graphic novel. Some people will try it. Some people really like the thought balloons, but other people really want to read a paragraph.
Right.
And so I thought, okay, I'll try that. I'll see how that works, because I had done a few graphic novels before that were in that, what people would understand when they were thinking about graphic novels. And I thought, well, I'll try something different this time.
In reading your book, the first thing that came to my mind is, and I pardon the comparison, but the movie Forrest Gump, only because of the way in that the various locales are presented in similar situations, that the important moments in time in history, I think, that's the thing that stands out for me. And I don't know if that's a fair comparison to make.
Well, I think it is, in the sense that these two people, Justin and Mary, actually it's David and Mary, but David changes his name to Justin because he thinks it sounds cool. And they arrive in Vancouver in the summer of 1971. And he's from Calgary and she's from Toronto. And she comes in on a bus and he hitchhikes. And he ends up being part of the biggest and ultimately the most successful squat protest in Vancouver on the edge of Stanley Park. She comes in, she's a little more traditional. She is trying to experiment a little bit with what's going on, but wants to get a job, wants to have a cat, wants to have a nice place to live, this sort of thing. And so they keep bumping into each other and then separating. And when they meet and they appear as if maybe they're going to hook up, it's in a beer parlor, a rather famous beer parlor in Vancouver called the Cecil. It goes on from there, and then her old boyfriend arrives from Toronto, and she's still sort of in love with him. And so it kind of goes on from there, and they keep bouncing off each other. Towards the end of the book, he moves to San Francisco. Doesn't really work out the way that he thought it was going to work out. She goes to India, and her boyfriend gets hepatitis in India. Not that unusual at that time, and he dies there. She comes back. I'm giving away the ending.
Yes, you are.
Sort of a rendezvous at the end. They just cross paths again. So, it's kind of a typical story in that way of that time of people moving around by, nobody had very much money. They would move around however they could. They were really kind of eking out an existence. And in his case, he feels that he wants to be a poet. He's come out of university. He wants to be a poet. He has no idea how to be a poet. He's a typical kind of disaffected university grad, comes out, lands in reality, doesn't know what the hell he's going to do. She's a little bit different. She's kind of more grounded, I guess, and she figures she'll use her skills and get a job and then kind of find her way that way. So, and then there's some other characters in there who have the same kind of conflicted aims.
Right, yeah. Wanted to address something else. Right from the outset in your foreword, you state that the book has a soundtrack, and you encourage readers to play the music as a soundtrack as they're reading the story. So I'm wondering, did you write the story intentionally with music accompaniment, or was that something you realized after the book was complete?
Well, it was in between those two. I started writing it, and all the music of that time was playing in my head. Just earworm stuff, really bad earworm stuff. Here's a song and they're doing this, and then I would write something and a song lyric would pop in my head. And, it's something from 50 years ago. It's talk about an itch that you have to scratch if you've got
right.
a long time memory for music. And so then I thought, well, I really like films that have a soundtrack. That, I'm thinking The Big Chill. I'm thinking of, ones that have got a kind of of that period that have a sort of a rock and roll soundtrack. And I thought, well, why shouldn't the book have a soundtrack? And so I put that in there. And then some of my millennial friends who were aware of this, and I was kind of bouncing ideas off them and say, does this work for you? Does this make sense to you? They, of course, are all... they have subscriptions to Apple Music and to Spotify. Mm-hmm. And so they said, well, we'll put the soundtrack up on Apple Music. And so that's what we've referenced in the back, that you can download the soundtrack, or you could just play your own music if you happen to have that. Or if you remember the songs, they could play in your head. But it just seemed to me to add another dimension to it, which I think, why shouldn't books have music?
Yeah,
it's just it's 21st century. We're not hung up on stuff like that anymore.
Sure, no, that's true. And the thing I have to ask artists sometimes when they're creating is I'm sure there's something in the background while you're creating, whether you're drawing or you're painting, you must have music in the background, right?
Well, the older I get, the harder I find it to multitask. And so the music is actually playing in my head as opposed to through speakers in general. And there'll be times that I'll be like I'll be inking a drawing and I'll be all kind of relaxed and everything. And so I'll put the music on, and it might be the music particularly, that's got that track in it for that particular page. And other times, I just need this total concentration. And anybody who does brush and ink or even pen and ink work will know that it goes really well until you make a mistake.
Yeah.
And then you go back. This is an argument for doing stuff in pencil or for digital retouching, I guess you can do, or maybe just doing straight digital. But I love Japanese ink, sumi, Japanese black ink. And so with a brush and that and a little bit of pencil underneath, you get going on a drawing and you get so immersed in it. And of course, sometimes you think that if you even breathe the wrong way, a line is going to go, and that fraction of a millimeter between an expression on a character there will change from what you want it to be to something you don't want it to be. Mm-hmm. And, so you're in that position, and everybody knows this. They end up drawing and redrawing. And, fortunately we can do, a little bit of digital editing now if we want to get them ready for publication.
Right. So I want to get to the next part, which is the tools used to create your art. And you just mentioned that you're using some ink specifically. I wonder if you could just elaborate a bit more about what you use there.
Well, I've got just a kind of a standard pencil in a way, and a really good eraser, and Bristol, kind of heavy paper board. Block things in pencil, I have a thing of saying never start inking on the day that you did the pencil.
Mm-hmm.
You got to walk away from it. You've got to come back and look at it out of the corner of your eye. Anything that is wrong in terms of character placement or that will jump out at you with that. Whereas if you just go right from the drawing that you did, right, for me anyway, going right into the inking, sometimes you get to the end of it or you'll get partway into it and you think, that person's feet aren't touching the floor,
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing. Now then, in terms of the inking, I've got this old brush called a squirrel mop, made in France. I bought for using watercolor in traveling, but it actually works really well with ink. And then I have a bottle of ink, and I can't read anything that what it says on the bottle because it's all in Japanese. But it's Sumi, and I got it at Daiso, which is that big, weird Japanese department store that you get in some of the big cities in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But you can get Chinese ink or India ink, and they will work just as well. But the Sumi, the Japanese ink, is a little bit more refined, I think, and it flows a little bit better so that when you are drawing that smooth curve around a woman's face and you're trying not to breathe and you can be pretty sure that you're not going to get a kind of a lump of ink that's going to come out of your brush and wreck the woman's face, at which point you scream and you rip the paper up and you start over.
I noticed the rooming house was done with ink, but I noticed that some of your previous books were done with watercolor. So the question I have for you is, do you have a preference, ink or watercolor?
Oh, I think, currently where I am is ink, and it's no color. No color at all. The watercolor books, things that I've done, they're kind of more formal books of painting outdoors and this type of thing, painting landscapes, painting buildings, that type of thing. The graphic novels that I did before Rooming House, I did in pencil. And pencil being that wonderful medium where, in theory, you can erase your mistakes. It never quite works out that way. But really boosting like a B or a 2B pencil into paper and getting a little bit of texture and getting a little bit of tone in it. And then scanning the images from that into Photoshop. Kind of boosting the contrast even more and cleaning up the background a little bit. If anybody knows about, scanning images and you get them in there and you increase the dark point in the thing to get it really black. But of course, that increases everything else. So you got to clean up the background. So I did that. There were 3 graphic novels that I did. One called Toshiko, that's in a 2nd edition. One called 2050 that is set, not surprisingly, in 2050. And then a biography of a woman named Julia that I did. And I did those all in pencil, and I did some kind of digital collage in them too, of rolling in, for example, old newspaper copy, that type of thing. And, so sort of playing around with the medium a little bit.
Right. Well, we've talked about Rooming House. I'm wondering, do you have any other projects that are coming up that you can talk about?
I think the short answer is no. The longer answer is probably, and just trying to figure out a kind of a plot line and a time and a place. A lot of the books that I've done have been set in Vancouver, set in British Columbia. No particular reason why that should happen in the future, but trying to think about what I would do and what format I would do, because I'm not particularly wedded to any format. The one thing that I don't want to do is do graphic novels with all kinds of narrative panels in them. That is something that I would rather let the pictures and the dialogue carry the story forward. So I don't want to do that. Having said that, of course, I did the Rooming House, which is a picture and then a diary entry underneath. So, I'm sort of crossing media there. But, in terms of a new plot line or what I would do, I'm still just kind of floundering around a little bit and thinking I'm going to, weather's getting better, I'm going to go out and paint some landscapes or something.
Right. Well, when the time is right, I'm sure you'll get to it, for sure. I wanted to ask you if you have any plans to attend conventions or festivals later on this year, as the COVID restrictions seem to be lifting. Do you have any plans for conventions?
I will be at VanCaf, the Roundhouse Center in Vancouver. And then the week after that, on the Friday the 20th, I will be at a Comic-Con that is at Heritage Hall in Vancouver, on Main Street in Vancouver. And who knows, cross fingers, I'll attend one somewhere else, or I'll get out on the road and maybe do a workshop or two. As things are opening up a little bit, I've done some graphic novel workshops for people in the past up in the BC interior, in towns like Nelson and Caslow and so on. I'd love to get back to doing that. I love seeing people who are bringing forward their ideas and they're just saying, where do I go from here? Can you give me some advice? And, having kind of been around the block a few times, I love, trying to help people out and, get them to refine their plots a little bit and talk about difficulties that they might have with reproducing them and so on. Now that also with things opening up, there's Cloudscape Comics in Vancouver, that I think that they will begin to meet again in person, and I intend to go back and start attending their meetings again.
Good to hear. Well, with all that activity going on, I'm wondering if there's a website where you recommend people go online to find out more about your current and future projects.
Well, it's my name, which is michaelkluckner.com, MichaelKluckner.com. And big website with all kinds of projects going back. I think the website's been up since the year 2000. So it's accrued a lot of stuff over the years.
Very good. Well, Michael, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
Let me just say to people who are listening and who are maybe graphic novelists, who are comic artists and everything, look to your own life, look to the characters in your own life and your experience to give you material to draw, and just start drawing and go with it. Go look at your favorite book, look at the format of it, think, could I do that? How are the panels divided up in the pages and everything? And go from there. I guess just the final thing about the rooming house, that the best comment on it was from a reviewer who is in his 30s, and he says, this is the closest thing that I have to a time machine. So he's picking up on the plot in that, but then also all the different notes and so on that are going on in the background. And, you mentioned Forrest Gump, the way that the guy ended up being at the place that all this stuff was happening. Well, it's the same with these characters here. There's all this stuff going on in the background, and they just keep arriving at the place at the same time. So you can learn a lot about the era and then have some fun reading it too. Thanks to Michael for the chat. You can discover more about Michael at michaelkluckner.com. That's MichaelCluckner.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.